Okay, continuing on with probability, we're on to classical probability and Venn diagrams, and this will just be an introductory and vocabulary page. We'll get into more detail in the next video. Please pay careful attention to this. Mutually exclusive and disjoint events. Mutually exclusive, disjoint mean the same thing, and these are events that cannot occur at the same time. All right, so a mutually exclusive event is the same as disjoint. And if we had a diagram of them, a Venn diagram, we would have no overlap. All right. So if they're mutually exclusive, there's no overlap. And an instance of this is flipping a coin, because the chance of getting heads is 50%, the chance of getting tails is 50%, and there's no overlaps. There is no both. Not both occurring at the same time. It's impossible. You either get one or you get the other. There's no both, all right? So mutually exclusive means both cannot. They both can occur, but not at the same time. So our diagram would have no overlap. So no overlap means mutually exclusive. If they're mutually exclusive, do not draw an overlap. For instance, you cannot make 100% on the test and make an F on the test at the same time. Let's say the probability of an A is 20%, which we're showing here, and the probability of an F is 10%. Obviously, you can't make an A and an F at the same time on the same test. So once again, there's no overlap. The probability of everything else is assumed to be 70%, because 10 plus 20 is 30. What's left over is 70%. So this right here, this outside box, is what's not included in our two events that we're talking about. So a complement means, when we talk about a complement, that means not something. One minus the probability the event will occur, or the probability of not that. So in this case, the probability of heads would be not heads. I think I know some of those. And the not heads, that complement is going to be tails. All right? Complement of tails is, well, not tails, which in this case would be heads. Going back to our problem up here, the complement of A is, be careful, it's not A, which means everything but A. So B, C, D, and F. All right, the complement of A is not A, which is B, C, D, and F. The complement of F is not F. You passed. All right, and everything that's passing is A, B, C, and D. All right, A, B, C, and D. We've already talked about independent events. All right, and independent events said that one did not rely on the other. We said the intersection, this is the intersection, so A intersect B equals A times B. This is hyper important because students get this confused. You cannot be mutually exclusive and independent. I'll say it again. You cannot be mutually exclusive and independent. Events cannot be mutually exclusive and independent unless one probability event is 0. All right? So you cannot be mutually exclusive and independent unless one of the event probabilities is 0. Now, you rarely talk about 0 probabilities because it means it's not happening. It's not interesting. So you cannot be mutually exclusive and independent at the same time. Mutually exclusive means there's no overlap. If they're independent, they're going to be an overlap, but the overlap must fit this. Just because you have overlap does not mean it's independent. If there is overlap and if it fits this description of A times B equaling the overlap, then they're independent. So a game requires that you roll a fair 4-sided die numbered 1 through 4 and to flip a coin. All right. So here's my outcomes. I have my outcomes are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're saying each one of these are likely. So 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25. And we're flipping a coin, and we can get a heads and tails, and this is 0.5, and this is 0.5. So there's my probabilities. The Venn diagram illustrates the probability of getting a heads, so this one, and rolling a 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so what's the probability of rolling a 1, 2, or 3? Well, that's 0.75. So I know just logically that flipping a coin and rolling a dice are independent. One does not impact the other. So since they're independent, I know that I can multiply. And if I take the 0.75 and I multiply it by the 0.5, it ends up being 0.375. And that gives me my overlap, because that's the probability of both occurring. That's the probability of getting a heads and having getting a heads and getting a 1, 2, or 3 on the dice. Now, this is where things get a little bit difficult to understand. This circle right here, the one that I'm circling right here, represents heads. All right, so it represents heads, and we know the probability of heads is 0.5, but the overlap was 0.375. So that tells me the probability of getting heads but not getting a 1, 2, or 3 is 0.125. Probability of getting heads, this is heads, but no 1, 2, 3 is 0.125. And together they sum up to the 0.5 that we're looking for. Now over here, both of these sum up to 0.75, which is the probability of rolling a 1, 2, or 3. This is the probability of the heads and the 1, 2, 3. This whole thing is the probability of 1, 2, 3. And this right here is 1, 2, 3, and tails. All right? Or 1, 2, 3, and not heads. This is 1, 2, 3, and heads. 1, 2, 3, and not heads. This is heads. This is heads and 1, 2, 3, and this is heads and 4. Okay. Well, we also have one other possibility, which is tails and a 4. So the probability of getting a tails and a 4 is 0.125. And you're like, I'm not sure where that came from. So the probability of getting a 4 is 0.25. That's the probability of getting a 4. And the probability of getting a tails is 0.5. So 0.25 times 0.5 is 0.125. That's where that comes from. All right, this is hyper important, and we're going to do a lot with this on the next video. I need to make a note of it here. The general addition rule, we can use anytime things are being added. All right, so A union B, union means add, this means add, equals A plus B minus the intersection, or A or B, or A plus B minus the intersection. All right, super, super important. We can always use this when they're asking us to add probabilities. It's A union B equals A plus B minus the intersection. All right. And we will talk more about that in our next video. And for whatever reason, my mouse is not working right this second.